The invitation arrived on cream-colored paper, embossed with gold lettering that caught the morning light streaming through my Boston apartment window. I held it delicately, reading the elegant script. Sophia Parker and Michael Harrison request your presence at their wedding celebration. No personal note, no warmth, just my name printed in the same impersonal font as everyone else's. I set the invitation on my kitchen counter and stared at it for a long moment. 3 years had passed since I'd last seen Sophia, my older sister, in person. 3 years since I'd walked away from the tech startup we'd built together, leaving behind everything I'd helped create when she systematically erased my contributions and rewrote our company's origin story. Sophia had always been the golden child, charismatic, photogenic, effortlessly commanding attention wherever she went. I was the quiet one, the technical mind behind our innovations, content to work in the background while she dazzled investors and media alike. But somewhere along the way, we became she, and I became a footnote in my own story. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Emma, please come. Family should be together for important moments." The message carried the weight of expectation, the familiar pressure to maintain appearances that had defined my childhood. I typed and deleted several responses before simply replying, "I'll be there." The dress I chose was simple: navy blue, understated, professional. I wanted to blend into the background, to observe rather than participate. As I packed my small suitcase, I caught my reflection in the mirror. At 28, I looked older than my years, stress lines etched around my eyes from the sleepless nights I'd spent rebuilding my career from scratch after leaving Innovate Now, the company Sophia and I had founded together. The flight from Boston to Martha's Vineyard felt endless. I spent the time reviewing my notes for the consulting project I'd been working on, trying to distract myself from the knot of anxiety tightening in my chest. The island wedding venue was predictably perfect, a sprawling estate overlooking the ocean, with manicured gardens and enough space for the 300 guests Sophia had insisted upon. My parents, Robert and Margaret Parker, greeted me at the rehearsal dinner with the same polite distance they'd maintained since I'd left the company. They'd never understood why I'd walked away from what they saw as guaranteed success. To them, I was the ungrateful daughter who'd abandoned family loyalty for pride. "Emma, darling," my mother said, air-kissing my cheek, "you look tired. Are you eating enough?" The concern was performative, delivered with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. My father nodded curtly in my direction before returning to his conversation with potential investors. Even at his daughter's wedding, Robert Parker was networking, always building connections that could benefit the family business empire he'd spent decades constructing. Sophia swept into the room like a force of nature, her auburn hair perfectly styled, her engagement ring catching every light. She was radiant in the way that came naturally to her, the way that had made investors believe in her vision, even when the technical details were mine. She spotted me across the room and approached, with her signature smile. "Emma, you made it." She embraced me briefly, a gesture more for the watching crowd than any genuine warmth. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "Wouldn't miss it," I replied, matching her smile with practiced ease. "Good. I know things have been complicated between us, but tonight is about moving forward." She paused, her eyes flickering with something I couldn't quite read. "I hope you can be happy for me." I nodded, not trusting my voice. Happy for her success built on my erased contributions? Happy for her perfect life that had cost me mine? I managed a simple, "Of course." The rehearsal dinner passed in a blur of polite conversation and careful avoidance. I sat at a table with distant cousins and family friends, making small talk about my consulting work while sidestepping questions about why I'd left Innovate Now. The official story was that I'd wanted to pursue independent opportunities. The truth was more complicated. That night, alone in my hotel room, I opened my laptop and found myself scrolling through articles about Innovate Now's latest product launch. There, in every interview, was Sophia describing her breakthrough innovation and visionary leadership. The technology she discussed was built on algorithms I'd developed, user interface designs I'd created, and market research I'd conducted. My 3 years of work had become her overnight success. I closed the laptop and tried to sleep, but memories kept surfacing. Late nights in our shared apartment, working side by side on code that would revolutionize how small businesses managed their digital presence. The excitement in Sophia's voice when she'd call investors about our ideas. The gradual shift in pronouns as meetings progressed. The rewritten company history that positioned her as the sole founder. The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful. The ceremony was held in the estate's rose garden, with white chairs arranged in perfect rows and an arch of flowers framing the ocean view. I took my assigned seat in the third row, behind Sophia's college friends and ahead of the business associates, as usual. The processional music began. I watched my sister walk down the aisle in a dress that probably cost more than my annual rent. She was stunning, genuinely happy, and for a moment, I almost forgot the years of hurt that lay between us. Michael, her fiancé, was a good man, a pediatric surgeon who clearly adored her. Whatever my feelings about Sophia's treatment of me, I could see that she'd found real love. The ceremony was perfect, as everything in Sophia's life tended to be. She'd written her own vows, speaking eloquently about partnership, trust, and building a future together. The words stung, given how she'd defined partnership when it came to our business relationship. The reception was held in a massive white tent overlooking the water. Round tables for 10 were decorated with cascading orchids and crystalware that sparkled in the afternoon light. I found my table toward the back, seated with a mix of distant relatives and plus ones who seemed as disconnected from the celebration as I felt. During cocktail hour, I nursed a glass of wine and watched Sophia work the crowd. She moved from group to group with practiced ease, accepting congratulations and posing for endless photos. Several times, people approached me with recognition dawning in their eyes. "Aren't you Sophia's sister? The one who used to work with her?" They'd ask, and I'd nod politely, deflecting further questions with vague responses about pursuing different paths. One conversation stood out. A woman named Jennifer, who introduced herself as a tech journalist, seemed genuinely interested in my current work. "I remember reading about the early days of Innovate Now," she said. "There were some articles that mentioned a co-founder, but the recent coverage only focuses on Sophia's role. What happened to your involvement?" I felt my chest tighten. "I decided to move in a different direction," I said carefully. "Sophia was always the better fit for leading the company." Jennifer nodded, but her expression suggested she sensed there was more to the story. She handed me her business card. "If you ever want to share your perspective on the tech startup world, especially from a technical founder's viewpoint, I'd love to talk." I pocketed the card, knowing I'd never use it. The last thing I wanted was to become the bitter ex-partner, airing grievances in the press. As dinner was served, I found myself seated next to Dr. Harrison's elderly aunt, who regaled me with stories about her late husband's medical practice. It was pleasant enough, a respite from the undercurrent of tension I felt whenever family members glanced my way. The speeches began as dessert was cleared. Michael's best man delivered a humorous toast about their friendship since medical school. Sophia's maid of honor, her college roommate, spoke about her loyalty and ambition. Then my father stood up. Robert Parker commanded attention effortlessly. His voice carried across the tent as he spoke about watching his daughter build a successful company from nothing, about her determination and innovative spirit. He painted a picture of Sophia as a self-made entrepreneur who'd overcome every obstacle through sheer force of will. Every word felt like a knife. He was describing my life, my work, my sacrifices, but giving credit to someone else. I gripped my wine glass tighter, feeling the delicate stem bend under the pressure. Then Sophia stood to respond. She thanked everyone for coming, spoke lovingly about Michael, and expressed gratitude to her parents for their support. Then she turned to the topic of her business success. 5 years ago, I had a crazy idea about revolutionizing small business technology, she began, her voice carrying perfectly across the silent tent. Everyone thought I was too young, too inexperienced, but I believed in the vision, and I was willing to do whatever it took to make it reality. I felt something crack inside me. Not everyone had thought she was too inexperienced. I had believed in her vision because it had been partly mine. I had worked 18-hour days to write the code that made her dreams possible. I had sacrificed my social life, my health, my own ambitions to build something we were supposed to share. The journey wasn't easy, Sophia continued. There were nights I worked until dawn, weekends I spent debugging code, moments when I questioned whether I was smart enough to solve the technical challenges we faced. But persistence paid off, and Innovate Now is now valued at over $50 million. The crowd applauded enthusiastically. I sat frozen, my wine glass trembling in my hand. She was describing my nights, my weekends, my technical challenges. She was taking credit for code I'd written, problems I'd solved, innovations I'd created. I want to thank everyone who supported me during those difficult early years, she concluded, raising her glass. Your faith in me made all the difference. The tent erupted in applause and cheers. People stood, clapping enthusiastically for Sophia's inspirational story of entrepreneurial success. I remained seated, unable to move, unable to breathe properly. That's when I saw him. David Chen, CEO of TechPulse, one of the most successful software companies on the East Coast. He was sitting at a table near the front, and unlike everyone else, he wasn't applauding. He was looking directly at me, his expression thoughtful and concerned. David and I had met briefly at a technology conference 2 years earlier, shortly after I'd left Innovate Now. He'd been impressed by my technical insights during a panel discussion and had offered me his business card, suggesting we stay in touch. I'd been too raw then, too hurt and confused to follow up. But he remembered me. As the applause died down and guests returned to their conversations, I excused myself from the table and headed toward the restroom. I needed a moment to compose myself, to process what I'd just heard. But as I walked through the crowd, I heard fragments of conversation that made everything worse. She's so inspiring, one woman was saying to her companion. Building a $50 million company in her 20s. I heard she taught herself to code, another guest commented. Brilliant and beautiful. Her parents must be so proud. Sophia Parker, the tech prodigy. I locked myself in the bathroom and stared at my reflection. My carefully applied makeup was smudged, my hands were shaking, and I looked like someone who'd been slapped without warning. Which, in a way, I had been. When I emerged, I found David Chen waiting near the restroom entrance. His presence was calm and steady, a sharp contrast to the chaotic emotions swirling inside me. Emma, he said quietly, could we talk for a moment? I nodded, not trusting my voice. He guided me to a quiet corner of the tent, away from the main crowd. I want you to know that I remember our conversation in Chicago, he began. You described an algorithm for predictive analytics that was remarkably sophisticated. I looked into Innovate Now after we met, and I found it interesting that their breakthrough product seemed to use that exact approach. My throat tightened. I don't know what you're suggesting. I'm not suggesting anything, he said gently. I'm stating a fact. The technical architecture of Innovate Now's platform bears striking similarities to the concepts you discussed with me. Concepts that required deep expertise in machine learning and data science. I looked away, unable to meet his eyes. Sophia is very talented. I'm sure she is. But talent in business development and talent in algorithm design are different skill sets. I've been in this industry for 15 years, Emma. I know the difference between someone who understands technology and someone who sells it. Before I could respond, Sophia's voice cut through the air behind us. Emma! There you are! She approached with a bright smile that didn't quite hide the sharpness in her eyes. I was wondering where you disappeared to. She turned to David, extending her hand. I don't believe we've met. I'm Sophia Parker. David Chen, TechPulse, he replied, shaking her hand politely. Sophia's smile became even brighter. Of course. I've heard wonderful things about your company. I'd love to discuss some potential collaboration opportunities. Actually, David said, his tone remaining perfectly cordial, I was just talking to Emma about her technical background. She has impressive insights into machine learning applications. Sophia's smile faltered almost imperceptibly. Emma's always been interested in technology, though she decided it wasn't the right fit for her career path. Is that so? David looked at me curiously. That's surprising, given the sophistication of the algorithms she described to me in Chicago. I felt caught between them, the weight of years of silence pressing down on me. This was my moment to speak. Up to claim credit for my work, to tell the truth about Innovate Now's origins. But the old patterns were too strong, the habit of invisibility too ingrained. I just helped out in the early days, I said quietly. Sophia's relief was visible. Emma was a wonderful assistant when I was getting the company off the ground. I couldn't have done it without her support. Assistant. The word hit me like a physical blow. I hadn't been an assistant. I'd been a co-founder, an equal partner, the technical architect of everything we'd built. But in Sophia's retelling, I'd become staff, support, a helpful but ultimately replaceable part of her success story. David's eyebrows rose slightly. Assistant? I was under the impression that Emma had developed some of the core algorithms herself. Oh no, Sophia laughed, the sound light and dismissive. Emma helped with some basic coding tasks, but the real innovations came later, after she'd moved on to other opportunities. Basic coding tasks. I felt something snap inside me, a thread of composure I'd been holding onto for years. My hands began to shake and I clenched them into fists to stop the trembling. That's not... I started, then stopped myself. What was the point? Who would believe me over her? She had the company, the success, the recognition. I had nothing but memories and deleted emails. Not what? Sophia prompted, her tone still sweet but with an edge of challenge. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not my sister but a stranger who'd stolen my life and repackaged it as her own success story. The weight of 3 years of silence, of watching her build an empire on my foundation while I struggled to rebuild my career from scratch, suddenly felt unbearable. That's not how I remember it, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Sophia's mask slipped completely. Well, memory can be unreliable, can it? Especially when someone is feeling resentful about choices they made. The conversation had drawn attention. Other guests were beginning to notice the tension between us. Conversations quieting as people sensed drama unfolding. Resentful? I repeated, my voice growing stronger. You think I'm resentful? Aren't you? Sophia's voice carried clearly now, drawing more stares. You left the company because you couldn't handle the pressure of real business, and now you want to claim credit for work you never could have completed on your own. The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Conversations around us stopped entirely. I could feel hundreds of eyes watching us, waiting to see how I would respond to my sister's public dismissal of my capabilities and contributions. For a moment, I was transported back to childhood, to all the times Sophia had minimized my achievements, dismissed my ideas, made me feel small and insignificant. The pattern was so familiar, so deeply ingrained, that part of me wanted to apologize and retreat, to preserve the peace and maintain the family facade. But something had changed. Maybe it was David's presence, the validation from someone who understood technology and recognized my expertise. Maybe it was the journalist's business card in my pocket, the reminder that there were people interested in hearing untold stories. Or maybe it was simply that I'd reached my breaking point. You're right, I said, my voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet. I am resentful. I'm resentful that you built a $50 million company on algorithms I designed. I'm resentful that you give speeches about teaching yourself to code when I spent 3 years writing every line of Innovate Now's core platform. I'm resentful that you describe late nights debugging code when you never touched a keyboard after our first month in business. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Sophia's face went white, then flushed red with anger. How dare you, she hissed. On my wedding day, in front of my friends and family, you want to spread lies about... They're not lies, I interrupted, my voice growing stronger with each word. The predictive analytics engine that made Innovate Now's reputation? I wrote that. The user interface that tech blogs called revolutionary? I designed that. The machine learning algorithms that process data for 50,000 small businesses? Those came from my research, my late nights, my code. The silence was deafening. 300 wedding guests stood frozen, champagne glasses halfway to their lips, as they watched two sisters tear apart years of carefully constructed family mythology. Sophia's composure cracked completely. Her face contorted with rage, and she grabbed a glass of red wine from a nearby table. Before I could react, she threw the contents directly at me, the dark liquid splashing across my navy dress and face. "You pathetic, jealous bitch," she snarled, her voice carrying across the entire tent. "You can't stand that I succeeded where you failed. You can't stand that people respect me while you're nobody." Wine dripped from my hair onto my shoulders. The expensive fabric of my dress was ruined, stained dark red like blood, but I didn't move to wipe it away. Instead, I stood perfectly still, looking at my sister with a clarity I'd never experienced before. The tent was absolutely silent. Not a glass clinked, not a whisper could be heard. Even the string quartet had stopped playing. 300 people watched in shock as the bride stood with an empty wine glass in her hand, her perfect wedding day shattered by her own fury. That's when David Chen stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice calm, but carrying easily across the silent crowd. "I think there's been some confusion about Innovate Now's technical origins that needs to be clarified." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone, tapping the screen a few times. "Emma Parker and I met at the Chicago Tech Conference 2 years ago, where she was presenting on advanced machine learning applications in business analytics. I recorded part of her presentation because I was so impressed by her technical insights." He held up his phone, and suddenly Emma's voice filled the tent, describing complex algorithmic approaches with the fluency and expertise that could only come from someone who had developed them personally. "This presentation took place 6 months after Emma left Innovate Now," David continued. "But the algorithms she's describing in detail here are identical to the ones that became Innovate Now's signature technology. Unless Emma somehow reverse-engineered her own sister's innovations and mastered them completely in 6 months, I think we can draw some obvious conclusions about who the real technical founder was." He pocketed his phone and looked directly at Sophia. "I've been in the tech industry for 15 years. I know the difference between someone who creates technology and someone who markets it. Both skills are valuable, but credit should go where credit is due." The silence stretched on, heavy with implications. Then, slowly, someone began to clap. It was Jennifer, the tech journalist I'd met earlier. Her applause was joined by another guest, then another, until a significant portion of the crowd was applauding, not for Sophia, but for me. My father stood up abruptly, his face red with embarrassment. "This is inappropriate," he said loudly. "This is my daughter's wedding, not a business conference. Whatever disputes exist between Emma and Sophia should be handled privately." "You're right," David replied calmly. "This should have been handled privately 3 years ago, when Emma's contributions were erased from company history. But since it wasn't, and since Sophia chose to make public accusations about Emma's capabilities, I felt it was important to provide some context." Margaret Parker rushed to Sophia's side, trying to salvage the situation. "Everyone, please," she said, her voice shaky. "This is all a misunderstanding. Sophia and Emma worked together. Of course Emma contributed. As an assistant," Sophia said bitterly, cutting off her mother's damage control. "She was always just an assistant." That's when something unexpected happened. Dr. Harrison's elderly aunt, the woman who'd been telling me stories about her husband's medical practice, stood up at her table. "Young lady," she said, addressing Sophia in a voice that carried surprising authority. "I may not understand technology, but I understand character. I've been watching your sister all evening, and she has the quiet confidence of someone who knows what she's talking about. You, on the other hand, have been performing all day." Her words carried weight that surprised everyone, including me. Sometimes wisdom comes from unexpected sources, and sometimes it takes an outsider to see what family members have been trained to ignore. The crowd's mood was shifting. Conversations resumed, but they were different now, speculative, questioning. People were looking at me with new interest and at Sophia with new skepticism. The perfect wedding narrative had cracked, and truth was seeping through the fissures. Michael, Sophia's new husband, appeared at her side looking confused and mortified. He'd married a successful entrepreneur, not knowing that her success story was built on someone else's foundation. I felt sorry for him. He was a good man caught in a situation he didn't understand and couldn't control. "I think we need to end this," he said quietly, putting a protective arm around Sophia. "This is our wedding day." He was right, of course. Whatever reckoning was coming, it didn't belong at their wedding reception. But sometimes the truth has its own timeline, and it doesn't respect our convenient boundaries. David approached me and handed me his handkerchief for the wine stains. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. I nodded, though I wasn't sure if that was true. My carefully constructed life of quiet acceptance had just exploded in the most public way possible. There would be consequences, conversations, confrontations I wasn't prepared for. "I want you to know," David continued, "that my offer of a position still stands. We need someone with your technical skills, and more importantly, we need someone with your integrity." I looked around the tent at the faces watching me, some sympathetic, some curious, some disapproving. My family was clustered around Sophia, closing ranks to protect her from the scandal I'd just created. They would never forgive me for this, I realized. The careful distance we'd maintained would become an unbridgeable chasm. But for the first time in 3 years, I felt like myself again. Not the invisible sister, not the helpful assistant, not the bitter ex-partner. Just Emma Parker, the woman who had built something remarkable and was finally ready to claim it. "Thank you," I told David. "I think I'm ready to discuss that position." The reception continued around us, but the energy had changed completely. The perfect wedding day had become a story that guests would retell for years. The day the bride threw wine at her sister and a tech CEO revealed the truth about stolen innovations. I excused myself and went back to my hotel room to change out of my wine-stained dress. As I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, washing red wine from my hair, I felt an unexpected sense of lightness. The weight I'd been carrying for 3 years was gone. The secret was out, the truth was spoken, and whatever came next, I would face it as myself. My phone buzzed with a text message from Jennifer, the journalist. "If you're ready to tell your story, I'm ready to listen. The tech world needs to hear about what really happens to women whose contributions get erased." I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Yes, let's talk." The next morning, I flew back to Boston with David Chen's job offer in my bag and Jennifer's business card in my pocket. Behind me, I left a family that would probably never speak to me again, but I also left behind the suffocating weight of living someone else's version of my story. 6 months later, Innovate Now faced a lawsuit from 3 former employees alleging that Sophia had systematically erased their contributions to the company's early development. The case never went to trial. It was settled quietly, with the company agreeing to restore credit to the original technical team and pay significant financial compensation. David's job offer turned out to be everything he'd promised. At TechPulse, I led a team developing next-generation analytics tools, with my name prominently featured in patents and publications. I gave talks at conferences where I was introduced as a founding expert in business machine learning, not as someone's former assistant. The article Jennifer wrote about erased technical contributions in startup culture was picked up by major publications and sparked industry-wide conversations about giving credit where credit is due. I was quoted extensively, finally able to tell my story in my own words. Sophia and I never reconciled. Our parents maintained their version of events, supporting her narrative even as evidence mounted to the contrary. Sometimes the cost of truth is higher than we expect, but silence has its own price, and I'd been paying it for too long. Standing in my new office overlooking Boston Harbor, I thought about the woman who had sat in the back row at that Martha's Vineyard wedding, invisible and voiceless. She had found her way to this moment through the courage to break a silence that had protected everyone except herself. If you've ever felt erased, overlooked, or invisible in your own story, remember this: your voice matters, your contributions have value, and sometimes the most important audience for your truth is yourself. The world is full of people ready to diminish your achievements, but it's also full of people ready to recognize and celebrate them. You just have to be brave enough to speak up. Sometimes the cost of silence is higher than the cost of truth, and sometimes finding your voice is the only way to find yourself. If Emma's story resonates with you, if you see yourself in her quiet strength and ultimate courage, remember that every voice matters and every story deserves to be told. Thank you for joining me on this journey of reckoning, resilience, and the power of finally speaking up.